They called it a final exam, a clean, contained simulation where nothing truly bad could happen. But on the moment the station's lights dimmed and the tactical map blossomed across 100 desks, one student in row 3 felt her stomach go cold, because the threat wasn't on the screen. It was already in the room. The hall smelled like antiseptic polymer and overheated circuitry, the particular scent of a place designed to survive panicked students. Rows of desks curved like an amphitheater around the proctor's dais, where a single black column rose from the floor, the exam core humming softly as it spun up. Lieutenant Examiner Vask stood beside it with the rigid confidence of someone who had never been wrong in public. His uniform was starched into straight lines, his mandibles clicked once impatiently. "Cadets," he said, voice amplified without effort. "Final evaluation, threat recognition and response. You will receive a live scenario. You will have 3 hours to identify the threat, propose mitigation, and execute a response through the simulation interface." A ripple of excitement moved through the hall. You could feel it, the delicious fear of being tested, the sharp pride of wanting to win. At desk C3, third row, third seat, Mara Havel sat with her hands folded, palms pressed lightly together as if she were warming them over an invisible flame. She was small compared to most of the cadets. Not weak, just compact, human. A species that still got categorized in casual conversation as energetic, the way you might describe a volatile fuel. Around her, alien cadets filled the room, tall scaled Vayari with mirrored eyes, squat stone Skinkarth whose breaths whistled like bellows, the elegant Sulari whose limbs moved like silk and whose confidence always arrived before they did. No one looked at Mara. That was the rule of the room. Humans did not belong in the upper tiers of the academy, at least not in the eyes of students whose families had served in fleets for 1,000 cycles. Mara didn't mind being unseen. Unseen meant you could watch. Vask's claw tapped the console. The exam core chimed and every desk lit with a holographic overlay, a rotating model of a mid-sized orbital station labeled HESPER-9 with docking arms and radiators unfurled like petals. "Scenario," Vask announced. "You are Security Command on HESPER-9. Civilian population 6,000, one diplomatic delegation inbound. The station is scheduled for a refuel and resupply convoy in 40 hours. Intelligence reports possible hostile activity in the sector." The model zoomed outward, revealing a bubble of space with annotated vectors. A handful of contacts blinked on the periphery, fast-moving objects with jagged trajectories. The room leaned forward as one. "Pirates," someone whispered, almost eager. Mara's eyes moved not to the contacts but to the station systems list scrolling along the right side of her display: power routing, life support redundancies, maintenance schedules, cargo manifests. She listened to the room as the scenario unfolded. People spoke in quick, proud bursts as if their ideas were missiles they wanted to launch first. "They're probing the perimeter. Intercept with patrol drones. They'll try boarding at the merchant ring, look at the approach vector. Deploy jammers." Vask's expression didn't change. He watched them like a butcher watching animals choose which door led to the slaughter. Mara kept reading. Her desk interface was older than the others, a hand-me-down model assigned to special cases. Its projection had a faint flicker at the edges. She didn't mind. Flicker made you appreciate what stayed steady. A new alert popped up. "Station maintenance drone swarm, routine diagnostics scheduled. T001700. Mara frowned. Routine diagnostics during a high-threat window. The station's automated scheduler would have been overridden standard protocol, unless someone wanted those drones active. Drones had keys, not weapons keys, not the dramatic kind, the boring kind. Access keys, doors, vents, conduits. The places people didn't watch because they assumed the station was their friend. Mara tapped into the drone's schedule, cross-referenced it with the cargo manifest. Her fingers moved quietly, efficiently. A line item blinked: cryogenic medical supplies, sealed priority delivery, Dock Arm 4. Dock Arm 4 was far from the civilian ring. Good for security, bad for oversight. Dock Arm 4 was where you hid things you didn't want in the way. Her throat tightened. She glanced up. On the proctor's dais, Vask watched the class with that same bland patience. But his antennae were angled slightly toward the center of the room as if listening for something else. Mara's gaze drifted past him to the exam core column. There on the black surface was a tiny maintenance panel. The panel was ajar, just a fraction. The exam core wasn't supposed to be touched during an evaluation. It was sealed. Mara looked back down, forcing her breath to stay calm. Her mind clicked through possibilities like a lock tumbling. If the exam core had been compromised, the simulation could be manipulated. But why? To cheat? No, this was the academy. Cheaters got caught by design. The system was built to punish arrogance. Unless the compromise wasn't for cheating, unless the compromise was the threat, the room erupted with confidence as the pirate contacts split into two groups, one accelerating toward the station, another fanning out wide. Decoy tactic. A Sulari cadet called. They want us to waste resources on the split. Assign interceptors to the main vector, said a Vayari with a jeweled collar. The others are a feint. Mara didn't raise her hand. She learned early. When you spoke in a room like this, you became an exhibit. People didn't listen. They evaluated whether you deserved to be heard. Instead, she sent a private ping through the desk network, an old habit from human disaster response training where you didn't ask permission to flag a problem. System note, routine maintenance drone swarm scheduled during threat window. Exam core panel appears unsecured. Possible scenario internal sabotage vector. Recommend immediate isolation of core and audit of drone access keys. She sent it to the Proctor channel. The message indicator flashed, delivered. Vask did not react. A minute later, her desk chimed, a response. Proctor Cadet Havel, focus on assigned scenario parameters, external speculation not scored, external speculation. Mara's stomach sank not because she'd been dismissed, but because Vask had used the exact phrase her father used when he didn't want to admit he was scared. She swallowed, eyes returning to the station model. The pirate contacts drew closer. The class deployed drones and jammers and countermeasures in the simulation. Their tactics were elegant, textbook perfect, and then the station's internal map flickered. A maintenance drone icon moved where it shouldn't, through a sealed bulkhead into a restricted conduit. The room didn't notice. The tactical overlays were crowded with flashing red contacts in space with imagined boarding pods and heroic interception arcs. No one cared about a tiny gray dot inside a station schematic. Mara cared. She expanded the internal map, tracking the drone. Its designation read MD-17. She clicked into its permissions. The drone had been granted a temporary override key issued by Exam Core admin. Her breath caught. In her peripheral vision, she saw other cadets grinning as their interceptors destroyed pirate craft. They spoke over one another, congratulating themselves in advance. Mara's cursor hovered over the drone's route projection. It was headed toward a cluster of systems behind the diplomatic wing. Power distribution, environmental controls, and oddly communications relay. She imagined it, a hostage situation without a single gunshot. Lock down air, cut comms, force concessions. Or worse, vent one corridor and call it an accident. Humans had done that once, not out of malice, out of desperation. Mara had studied the footage in grim training rooms where instructors said, "Look, this is what you become when you think you can't lose." She opened a new window and ran a simple check, which internal systems were scheduled for maintenance during the next 20 minutes. The list populated. Too many, that was the point. A maintenance surge was cover. A swarm of harmless drones meant you couldn't track one that wasn't harmless. Her fingers moved faster. She crafted a response plan not for pirates, but for the kind of threat that wore a uniform and carried access keys. She initiated an internal security protocol in the simulation. Isolate Dock Arm 4. Lock down maintenance conduit access. Revoke temporary overrides. Put drones swarm into safe mode. The interface warned her. Action conflicts with primary scenario objective. External hostile craft approaching. Mara clicked proceed. Her score meter, visible at the corner of her screen, dipped sharply as the system penalized her for resource diversion. The class laughed when they noticed. "What are you doing?" The jeweled collar Vayari called across the aisle, his voice rich with amusement. "The pirates are outside." Mara didn't answer. She didn't have the breath to waste. MD-17 reached a sealed junction and stopped. For a moment it hovered like it was thinking, then it began to cut. A thin line of heat traced the seam of the bulkhead. The simulation rendered it with clinical precision. Mara's blood went cold. She'd been right. And being right in this room meant the threat was real enough to be modeled, or real enough to be happening. She sent another ping, this time to the class-wide channel, overriding the etiquette that said you did panic broadcast during exams. Internal sabotage vector. Maintenance drone MD-17 has exam core admin override and is breaching restricted bulkhead toward diplomatic wing systems. External pirate contacts may be decoy. Recommend immediate internal lockdown and audit of override keys. Silence hit the room like a dropped curtain, then the Sulari in the front row scoffed. That's noise, the scenario is pirates, that's the scenario. Proctor, someone called uncertain. Vask watched, expression unreadable. Continue, he said, Mara's hands clenched. That single word continue felt like a blade. Fine, she continued. While the class focused on the external pirate threat, Mara peeled open the station's internal logs. She followed the admin override trail. In a secure system, every key had an origin. Every origin had a signature. The signature was hidden behind a generic label, but the metadata was override issued, T, issuer terminal, exam core column, maintenance panel access. Mara's gaze snapped up to the dais. The maintenance panel on the exam core was still slightly open. Vask stood beside it, arms folded. He met her eyes for the first time all day, not the glance you give a nuisance. The look you give a fire when you're deciding whether to stamp it out or let it burn. Mara's mouth went dry. A thought hit her, sharp as a slap. This wasn't just an exam scenario. This was an exam about the exam, a trap to see if anyone would notice the thing you weren't supposed to question. The pirate contacts, the decoys, the flashy tactical map, it was all theater. A stage designed to make smart people behave stupidly. Mara looked back down. MD-17 had breached the bulkhead. It drifted through into the restricted corridor near the diplomatic wing. On her screen, oxygen levels in that corridor began to drop. The room erupted. Why is life support failing? Someone shouted. That's not in the brief. Proctor, is this a glitch? Vask's voice cut through calm. Not a glitch. The class scrambled. Their external interceptors floated uselessly in simulated space while inside the station people began to die in the model, tiny icons turning from green to yellow to red. Panic made them clumsy. They issued broad commands: restore oxygen, override the override, shut down all drones. The system punished them. Broad commands conflicted, overrides locked them out. Their desks flashed access DNID in angry red. Mara didn't issue broad commands, she targeted the knife instead of flailing at the bleeding. She opened the station's physical layout and highlighted the corridor MD-17 was in. She initiated a containment, seal both ends. Flood corridor with inert foam. Cut power to drone's local grid. The drone jerked mid-flight, its cutting laser stuttered then died. The oxygen drop stabilized. In the model, icons flickered back from red to yellow. Mara exhaled one small shaky breath, then her console chimed. New alert, Dock Arm 4 unauthorized manual release initiated. Cargo, cryogenic medical supplies seal compromised. Mara's heart hammered. Cryogenic supplies weren't just medicine. Cryo-containment was used for anything you didn't want warm, anything you didn't want awake. The class finally noticed Dock Arm 4. Their eyes widened as the external pirate contacts, still unengaged, accelerated again right as the docking arms clamps unlocked. The pirates weren't boarding, they were receiving, a handoff. Mara's brain stitched it together, the pirates were smugglers. The internal sabotage was to open the dock and blind comms long enough for a transfer. The real threat wasn't a battle, it was a theft, or an extraction. A student near the front row whispered, almost reverent, that's a covert operation. Mara's fingers flew. If the dock opened, whatever was inside those cryo containers could be moved, or released, or detonated, or simply taken. She ran a scan of the cargo contents. The manifest was scrubbed, of course it was. But the container's power draw told a story. One of them was pulling far more energy than medical supplies would need. A living payload. Mara felt sick. She imagined a person, maybe a diplomat, maybe a witness, maybe someone the academy wanted to test, packed in cold sleep, treated like an object. The class debated, frantic and loud. Send Marines, intercept outside, close the dock. Mara didn't have Marines. She had simulation controls and a brain shaped by a species that had survived centuries of being outgunned by being stubborn and mean and clever. She traced the dock's manual release signal back to its source. It wasn't coming from the station. It was coming from the exam hall, from the exam core. Mara's hands stopped. For a long heartbeat, she stared at her screen. Then she stood up. Chairs scraped. A few heads turned, annoyed at the disruption. Mara walked down the aisle toward the dais. Each step felt like walking through water. Vask watched her approach without moving. When she reached the base of the dais, she spoke quietly because quiet meant you didn't give the room something to chew on. "Lieutenant," she said, "the override keys are being issued from your core column. Dock Arm 4 is opening. The internal sabotage isn't inside the simulation, it's being injected." Mara's voice tightened. "If this is part of the evaluation, you're about to fail 6,000 simulated civilians." "If it's not part of the evaluation," she swallowed, "then the real threat is in this room." The hall fell so silent you could hear the exam cores hum. Vask's mandibles clicked once. "You're certain," he said. Mara's eyes didn't leave the slightly ajar panel. "Yes." Vask looked at the panel, then back at the class, at the students sweating over screens, at the ones who had mocked her minutes earlier, at the ones who were now pale with realization. He exhaled slowly. Then with deliberate care he reached into his uniform and pulled out a small device, a signal jammer the size of a coin. He set it on the console. The exam core's hum faltered. The holograms across the room flickered. A collective gasp rose as every desk displayed the same message. Simulation paused. Vask's voice carried, not loud but absolute. "Hands off your interfaces." Students froze mid-motion as if fear had finally found the right target. Vask turned to Mara. For the first time his expression shifted, not into warmth exactly but into something like respect. "You saw the threat," he said. Mara's pulse still pounded in her ears. "I saw the access." Vask inclined his head, a military gesture of acknowledgement. Then he addressed the hall. "This final exam is not about pirates," he said. "It is about you." Murmurs started, but he silenced them with a raised claw. "I gave you what you wanted," he continued. "A loud enemy, a simple story. A reason to feel heroic, and you chased it." Some students looked down, others bristled, offended. Vask's eyes swept the room. "While you chased it, an internal actor armed only with credentials nearly killed your station." He gestured toward Mara. One cadet in row 3 refused to be entertained. Heat rose in Mara's face, a familiar discomfort being looked at. The jeweled collar Vayari stared at her as if she had changed species in front of him. Vask continued, voice hard. "The greatest threats to any system are not always external. Sometimes they are introduced through complacency, through authority, through routines you stop questioning." He tapped the exam core panel with one claw and it clicked shut, sealing. This was a controlled injection. No real civilians died today, no real dock opened. A wave of relief shook the room, followed quickly by shame. Vask's gaze sharpened. "But you should all understand something." He paused, letting it hang. "On a real station, someone like me could be compromised. Someone like your instructor could be blackmailed. Someone with access could become the threat. If you cannot question the story you are given, if you cannot notice the quiet things, you will be used." He looked at Mara again. "Cadet Havel." Mara's throat was tight. "Yes, Lieutenant." "What made you look inside when the rest looked outside?" Mara hesitated. She could have said, "Because I'm human, because we learn to survive by expecting betrayal." But that sounded like pride. The truth was simpler and heavier. "Because," she said carefully, "when you're ignored, you learn to watch for the ways people get hurt without anyone noticing." Something in the room shifted at that, not admiration, not yet, but awareness. Vask nodded once as if confirming a hypothesis. Then he spoke words that landed like a final verdict. "Cadet Havel passes." A sharp inhale went through the hall. "And the rest of you," Vask added, "will repeat the evaluation." Groans and protests broke out, but they were weak, hollow, because now they had seen what mattered. Mara returned to her seat in row 3. As she sat, she noticed something she hadn't noticed earlier, the way the room's lights cast a faint shadow under every desk, under every chair. A room full of people, a room full of blind spots. The class restarted the simulation, modified now, stripped of its flashy pirate theater. The internal map was front and center. The maintenance schedules were highlighted. The access keys were visible. This time students worked differently. Quieter, slower. They started asking questions they hadn't wanted to ask before. Who issued the override? Why now? What does the attacker want? Mara watched them learn and she felt something ease in her chest. Not vindication, not triumph, just a small, stubborn hope. Because if the galaxy was going to survive, it wouldn't be because the strongest ship won the loudest battle. It would be because someone noticed the tiny gray dot moving where it shouldn't. And because someone finally listened to the person sitting ignored in row 3. Somewhere out there, the next pirate won't come with guns or banners, just a borrowed credential and a routine no one bothers to question. So if you ever find yourself overlooked, pushed to the back, or dismissed as noise, remember, the quiet seats have the best view of the truth.